Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Ulka. Good afternoon, Dr. Anandita Roy Saha, Coordinator Center for Earth Studies. I would like to welcome you all for this special lecture session of the online certificate course on climate, community, and conservation. So, first of all, I would like to thank you so much, Dr. Ulka, for accepting our invite. And yes, and it's a great opportunity to us for us to hear you today. So first of all, I would like to introduce the speaker of today's session to all our participants. Dr. Ulka Kelkar is Director, Climate Program, WRI India, World Resources Institute, India. She is an economist with 2 decades of experience in climate change research, capacity building, and outreach. She leads WRI India's work on climate policy, which aims to support India's pathway to a climate resilient, low carbon economy through judicious national policies, carbon market mechanisms, and effective implementation in states and cities. Before joining WRI India, Ulka worked as a consultant climate assessment specialist for the Asian Development Bank and a research fellow with the Energy Research Institute, TERI, and Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, ATRI. She conducted field research in several Indian states to assess how rural communities can adapt to climate change. She collaborated with architects and financial analysts to devise business models for low carbon, climate resilient housing in disaster prone regions of Bangladesh and Nepal. Her research has been published in various reputed journals in the field. So, welcome, Dr. Ulka Kelkar, once again. Now, over to you, ma'am.
Neha, may I just come in
Yes,
for a
ma'am, please,
minute?
ma'am. Sure. Yes, yes, yes.
Because I would really like to add one thing which is very, very important for
Important.
me and for the college, that Ulka is an alumna of Indraprastha College. So Ulka is back to her own college in a different capacity altogether. And for me, it's a very, very special and pleasurable occasion because students are always special. Students in the first batch are more special. Ulka was in my first batch of
Okay.
students. And students who have done so well in their professional lives give us the opportunity to bask in reflected glory as teachers. So I just got into it. Neha, I'm sorry.
No,
Because
ma'am.
this
No,
is a
it's
very,
you
very
got
emotional
it.
moment for me to have
Oh,
Dr. Ulka Kelkar here as a resource person. And I'm sure with her expertise and experience, all the participants will benefit. So, welcome, Ulka. Welcome to your college.
indeed,
Thank
ma'am. It's
you.
a
Thank
proud
you.
moment for all of us.
Yes, absolutely. She's one of our very, proud alumna.
Well, thank you so much for your very kind words and for making, for this very warm welcome. And thank you so much for asking me to speak. I think I can still recall as if it was yesterday, the first day I walked into the grounds of IP College straight out of school. And I still remember, always remember what a lovely feeling I got in that campus. That there's something about that building and that campus that just felt very warm and welcoming. And it gave me a chance to flourish in many ways, not just learn new things. I had never been exposed to economics before, but even debating, quizzing, even from other departments, English department, history department. So I think it's one of my fondest memories, and it gave me the confidence. Teaching of professors such as you, Professor, gave me the confidence to pursue a master's when almost everyone else in my batch at that time was pursuing an MBA. To somehow decided to study economics further. So I would definitely kind of just IP College is the seed of all the sort of things I've done in the last few years. But thank you very much. This is a very I think prestigious certificate course that the college is organizing and hosting. What I thought was, instead of getting straight away into lecture mode, I'll be really grateful if the participants could indulge me a little bit and tell me a little bit more about themselves. It will really inform, my discussion. I don't have a PowerPoint or lecture slide. I don't have a lecture script. What I plan to do is to share my screen with a interactive model that we have developed of the Indian economy. And the question that I want to ask with you today is, what kind of development pathways does India require in a way that we also create a strong economy? It's also good for our health, but is also good for the environment. So, can we have a development pathway for the country that is economically robust, but also environmentally not harmful? And the way I want to kind of explore this pathway with you is through this interactive model that my colleagues at World Resources Institute have developed. But before we get into the nitty-gritties of that, I'd be really grateful if, maybe Neha in alphabetical order or something like
sure.
that, we could just request and if it is possible, please don't turn on your camera. And if you could just share with me, you don't have to do a formal introduction, but either you could pose a question for me in the broad context of this certificate course that you've been attending. So either a question that you would like me to address, or if there is something that you have heard in this course so far that you would like to know more about, something that you have learned, or something that has just struck you as being interesting, I think that would be really helpful. But if you have any questions as well, that'd be great. So if you could just, Neha, if I could request you to.
Yes.
Yeah,
So students, I hope you have understood, ma'am, what ma'am is wanting to say, what she is saying. So I would request you all to please turn on your camera alphabetically. I think you can see it in the. Okay, yes. So please just present your views on whatever question you are having. If you want to say anything, so
right.
please, I think Anu, we can start with you, Anu Sharma. If you can please switch on your camera and you want to say anything, or you want to ask any question, whatever ma'am is saying, or anyone if they want to start with it, so that other participants may get an
Yeah,
idea. Or
everyone can take
anyone
time
can
to think.
volunteer. Yes, yes.
So either just a question or
Yeah,
a
Himanshu
comment. Yeah,
was. Yes,
go
please
ahead.
switch on your camera and unmute yourself and go ahead, Himanshu.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, actually the data capacity of mine is limiting me
No
to just.
problem. No problem. I can hear you clearly. You can just speak.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, I am a person who believes, if particularly in creation, communication, and compassion. So, when I joined this course, the very first lecture we had with Professor Maharaj Pandit, I hope I'm taking his name correctly. So, I have asked him a question about how to change that particular climate change thing. So, and the question was related specifically with the energy consumption. So the one thing he said to me is we should focus more on how we can lower down our energy consumption, our needs, to better the our climate and environment rather than putting trees here and there. So ma'am, I used to I all and all the time when I come to attend the lecture, I think about this question again and again. And for you, I have just this one question, like, we really want to change things, and like Mahatma Gandhi said that be the change that you want to see in other. So ma'am, how can we start this change, climate change journey at our home, because our home is so disturbed, like, at, if we see through the lens of the environment, that our home is like a plastic bag particularly. So I really feel like I feel very disturbed, like how can I start this change journey from myself and then share it with the others, because if I will not change anything, then how will I convince to others that please do not do this, it will harm the environment. So basically I really want to get the practical thing out of this course, and Neha ma'am has really given this a very golden opportunity. I am really absorbing and enjoying bit by bit this course, and I really, every time I just look then when the next class will happen. So it's my pleasure to be part of this. Thank you, ma'am. I hope I
Thank you.
I didn't create any mess here.
No, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Frankly, I think for me, the big question that you've asked is how to lower energy consumption and how to separate out or how to do things which can be done at an individual or household level. So, that's what we usually talk about is behavioral change and then aggregating that up to social change. Second, what is it that organizations like companies or corporates can do? And third, what is it that, there's a role of government in particular policy changes that would give signals to the overall economy. So I'll try to incorporate that into my talk. Yeah. Should we move on to another person? I think Priyasha has put in her question in the chat box. Priyasha, would you like
Yes,
to just
yes.
speak it out?
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Ma'am, I was afraid that my microphone wouldn't work, so like just in case I put it in the chat. But since it's working, so for many years now, I have been trying to understand what impact can be made by us as individuals, apart from changing our consumption habits or, like you said, behavioral changes. So maybe by changing our diet and going vegan, or changing our lifestyle by choosing sustainable alternatives, and or discovering or innovating greener inventions to existing polluting or unsustainable forms of processes. So basically my question is, we know that these are solutions which at an individual level make very I mean, according to me, it takes a lot of people to change their diets and lifestyles to make a considerable amount of change. But my question is, what else apart from this can I, as a student, do apart from all of this, and maybe also apart from spreading knowledge or awareness? What else is on the table that I, as an individual, can take up? Because I'm very passionate towards climate action. But this is a question that I've been trying to solve or, just brainstorm towards for many years now. And I would appreciate any direction at all from your end.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll try to answer that. Anyone else wants to go next? Yes, please. Vaditi Madan.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Varati, and I'm an undergraduate student of psychology honors. And my question for you is we've in recent years, not in recent years, but ever since the industrial revolution, especially, we've seen how the idea or the normative standard of development has become very Eurocentric and about overconsumption and exploitation of resources. But we see that how this endeavor of climate change or anything that's related to saving of the climate and this planet earth is actually the ideals are very opposite to that. But since all of us and all of the societies who are still in developing stages, they kind of try to achieve those kind of standards and norms and those kind of levels of development. So how can these two go together when economically we want those standards of development and climate from that point of view, from climate's point of view, it's very opposing.
Thanks. That's a really well framed question, and I'll be sort of trying to address that. Anyone else wants to go next? It doesn't have to be a question. You can just tell me, any particular. So Dhadini says I couldn't unmute and speak as I'm traveling. Just one second. Let me try to read that. I don't have any questions right now. I'm a student of geography honors. So the thing which fascinated me to enroll in this course, it talks about climate change, especially heat waves, which is a major issue. Okay, got it. How many of you heard about this new IPCC report that was launched? Did you sort of read about it in the newspaper? Yeah, Nishita? Do you want to just say a few?
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everybody.
we have
Okay.
about
Okay.
it. We have also discussed about it in something in the previous lectures also. Please, you want to say something about, add to their knowledge on this. Yes, we are eagerly looking forward to it. A discussion
Right.
on that.
Right. Yeah. So, what was it that concerned people the most? I mean, Rishita, would you be able to speak? Would you be able to unmute yourself? No? Okay, maybe there's some technical issue or something. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of attention, and I think the important thing is that there's still a lot of scientific kind of uncertainty about the range of impacts that will be felt. I think some of the reports, some of the scenarios that got the maximum attention were at the higher end of the the temperature projections. We're still hoping that if you know big economies, the US, Europe, China, India as well, Australia, Canada, all of these announce more action or more commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, then we will actually be able to avoid the worst of those impacts. So there was just some recent work that I saw, which so the IPCC report, the best estimate is that there'll be 3 degrees Celsius of warming. But the latest report that I'm seeing shows that maybe we can still stay within 2 degrees Celsius of warming. So some of the worst impacts will be avoided. But that depends on countries actually doing what they say they'll do. Okay, one more question from Himanshi is how the profit mentality of the market could be molded towards sustainability and how green economy will grow in the coming decades. Great. So I'll just wait for another minute in case anyone wants to speak up and share anything, and then otherwise I'll start sharing my screen. But just feel free to share any thoughts. It just gives me a better idea of the audience. So even if you just want to say what you're doing, are you a student, are you a lecturer, what is your field, just feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, anybody who has not spoken so far. Because to me, it helps to know if someone's from a history background or someone is from an econometrics background. Yeah.
Can I come in here?
Yeah.
Okay, so most of the students are from humanities and like various backgrounds. Undergraduate students are here. We also have few postgraduate environmental sciences students and faculty members. Few faculty members.
Okay.
So majority is undergraduate students from various disciplines.
Okay, great. All right. So what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to share my screen. Let's just see. Just let me know if you're able to see my screen. Yeah, you can see this auto rickshaw?
Yes, yes.
Great. So this is something that is there on the internet. You're welcome to look at it. I thought instead of doing a lecture with, PowerPoint and all of that, or just, giving my views, I thought we could explore some questions together, but not in a theoretical, qualitative way, but actually with numbers, with data. And the reason why I wanted to do it this way is because, as Neha mentioned, I belong to the economics department here, and my approach to environmental issues is also through an economics kind of lens. And many of you have very rightly raised the question about energy, industry, sort of the private sector, and about behavior, right? So usually in an economy, we talk about two things. We talk about demand and we talk about supply. So supply means what are the things that we are producing, how are we producing them, mainly right now using fossil fuels, which are the cause of the climate change problem. And the other side of it is what are we demanding, right? Who is buying these things? How much electricity do we need to have lectures like this? So basically on both sides, there are interventions that are possible. You can produce the same amount of stuff in a way that is cleaner or more efficient, and you can try to reduce your demand. These are the only two things. So the question that climate change or environment people are often asking, just as somebody asked about consumption, is that in a country like India, there are still so much of scarcities. There are so many people who still don't have access to reliable electricity. There are jobs that need to be created. So obviously, we will not approach the question in the same way that a developed country would, right? In India, it will be a slightly different approach. So the question that we're asking is, what are the policies that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in India, that can address climate change? But what would be the implications of this on the economy, right? So this is kind of model called a systems dynamics model. And by systems dynamics, we mean two things. One, that it is a system. It is not just one sector that we are looking at. We're not looking only at homes. We're not looking only at buildings. We're looking at everything together, how energy is used for transport, how transport leads to jobs, how jobs may lead to pollution. All of this together is linked to each other. And the dynamics part of it means that everything is changing. You're not looking at it at a given point of time, how it is this year or how it was last year, but you're letting everything change. Now, obviously, when you have so many things connected and everything changing, that means it's going to be a very complicated affair. So there'll be a lot of uncertainties. But let's try to step into the simulator and see, first of all, what would be India's future pathway if we don't do anything different from what we're doing now. Another thing is, Neha, I'm not able to see the chat or the raise hand. So if anybody has any questions, just feel free to either let me know, just speak up, or Neha, if you could let me know if there's
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
But feel free to interrupt me at any point for any clarification. In the beginning, I'll go a little slowly because then you'll get used to this. We're going to stay in this model for about 20 minutes or so, I think. So feel free to interrupt me. I'll go slowly in the beginning, and then I might suddenly start showing you lots and lots of graphs. So by then you'll be used to it. So what we do in this model is we look at something called a business as usual scenario. By business as usual, we mean not that we're not doing anything, but basically what the current trajectory is like. Like suppose, the pathway that we are currently on. And what this graph shows you is greenhouse gas emissions from India. 2020 is the current year. I hope you're able to see this. If someone is seeing it on a phone, then I don't know if you're able to see things, but let me know if you have a problem viewing it. It may not even show up on a phone very well. So let me know if you have an issue. So can anybody tell me why this is going down? Like it's all up, but only in this year it's gone down. There's a V shape. Why is that?
Ma'am, maybe because of the lockdown, there were reduced, the people were going out lesser than usual.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. It was because of the lockdown that a lot of economic activities were shut down, a lot of transportation had come to a halt. So the greenhouse gas emissions also came down, but not for long, right? We all saw those videos of how nature is healing and the sky is clearing up and all of that, but not for long. So even if you do a complete lockdown like that, if there isn't a fundamental change in the economy, we are going to continue as soon as the economy recovers, as soon as normal activity recovers, we're going to go back on this pathway of rising greenhouse gas emissions. So just to clarify, this is not for the world. This is for India. This includes current policy. So for example, you would have seen that India is installing a lot of solar power. India is beginning to get into electric vehicles. There are other plans also, for example, for planting trees. And there are things that happen anyway in terms of efficiency improvements in industry. Even if you take all these normal improvements into account, the greenhouse gas emissions in India are projected to go on rising without any kind of peak in sight. So this is why, there is a lot of concern about developing countries, that even though in the past their greenhouse gas emissions were very low, in the future as they develop, it is something that is a kind of cause for concern. Now, let's try to find out what is making these emissions go up, right? Why is this? Let's try to break it up. So one way to break it up is to look at only a particular gas, which is carbon dioxide, which is the most important greenhouse gas for India. So that's basically what you're seeing over here. Let's just look at, say, energy consumption, right? So this is what India, you're able to see this multicolored chart, yeah?
Yes, ma'am.
So, so let's just see, this is on the supply side, that what energy are we using in the future, I mean, today and in the future, in order to manufacture things, in order to travel, in order to light up our homes. So the important one, you don't have to look at all of them, but the important one is this gray at the bottom. This is coal. So coal is a resource that is there in our own country. We don't need to import it. We can mine it. We've been using it traditionally, or most of our power plants use coal. And in the business as usual scenario, coal continues to be the sort of most important kind of contributor. This one over here, the dark red, is oil. Now, oil is something that we need to import quite a lot of it. And so it becomes quite a kind of drain on our economy in terms of we have to pay the countries from whom we are importing the oil. So this is a problem. And then you have these nice things on top, this yellow and this blue, which are solar and wind. Those are the renewable energy, as we call them. And in the business as usual, that is at the rate at which India is going right now, you have a little bit of this renewable energy. But you can still see that these light ones are a small part of the energy consumption in 2050. And these dark ones, which are the fossil fuels, which are causing the greenhouse gas emissions, are still the major source of our energy supply, even in 2050. So this is really the heart of the problem. This is, as I said, the supply side, that what types of energy are we using? What if we were to look at, say, for example, the demand side? Yeah, just 1 second. Okay. So this is telling you which sectors in the economy are using this energy. And particularly here, I'm showing you electricity. So you can see the top green one is agriculture. It's growing a little bit. The next red one is transportation, growing a little bit, but still very small, right? We often see so many cars on our roads and all of that, but in the business as usual, electricity used by the transport sector continues to be small. We continue to use petrol or diesel vehicles. Then you have the gray, which is really big. That's industry. That's the entire industry sector, making cement, steel, fertilizers, chemicals. But look at the blue one. That's the one that's really going from a pretty small use of electricity right now to a pretty big share of it. It's going from 400 odd to 6 times it's increasing. Now, these buildings are both our residential buildings as well as our commercial buildings like malls or hospitals or offices. And the demand for electricity will come from things like air conditioning, using more appliances. So even for cooking, as the country develops, we'll start using more and more of induction stoves. It'll of course come for things like lighting and in various kinds of appliances and applications. So if you wanted to kind of, someone had asked about, how to lower energy consumption. I think that was one of the first questions that Himanshi had asked. If you really wanted to make a big impact, looking at the future, not just today. If you looked at it today, you would perhaps give equal importance to industry and buildings. But if you want to look at the future, buildings is something where now is the time to intervene. If you are able to find ways to reduce the energy consumption in buildings, either by making people more aware about their electricity usage in homes, or by mandating that commercial buildings use electricity much more efficiently, or they use it in a way that they generate their own rooftop solar power, then that would be the way you could put in plans right now, plans or policies right now through the government, so that this future increase doesn't happen. So I'm going to pause for 2 minutes over here before I move on to the next section, just to see if there's any question or any part of this that you didn't understand or you want to ask about. Yeah, just wait for half a minute. Okay, so we've looked at the electricity and the energy sector. Let's look at the transport sector. And remember, we're still right now staying very much within business as usual. We have not started looking at what do we need to do to reduce emissions. We're still looking at what's the future if we continue along our current trajectory. Now, this shows you vehicles by technology. Now, here we're looking only at cars. Can you see this drop-down list? Yeah?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
you can do the same. And I'm showing this to you because I would request all of you to just feel free to play with this. Think of it almost like a, like a video game or something that you can show to other people, and you can, feel free to just explore it later on. I'll share the link with you. So you can look at things separately, like trucks, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, cars, buses. So let me just look at some of them. So let's start with cars and SUVs, and this is the fleet composition. So interesting thing to look at is the future. Now, you'll ask me, how are you making these future projections, right? I mean, who knows the future? You're talking maybe by 2030, we can imagine next 9-10 years, we can imagine. But 2050, 30 years into the future, how do we know this? So we do this based on some historical trends, some trends that we are seeing in other countries, and some plans that are there, for the future. And we use all of these to kind of make projections. But of course, nobody knows the future. The whole point of this model is that these are just scenarios. Either this could happen or a cleaner future could happen. And I'll show you the cleaner future after 5-10 minutes. It is really right now in our hands which future will happen. Will the dirty future happen or will the cleaner future happen? So please don't think of this as a kind of forecast. It is a best guess kind of scenario. And a scenario comparison helps us to see the pros and cons and to choose which one we would like to go for. So here, if you can kind of, just one second. Yeah. Here, if you can see, in 2050, we are projecting that petrol vehicles and diesel vehicles will be the majority of the cars on the roads. And these ones, the yellow ones, are the electric vehicles. This is for cars. Let's just look at two-wheelers now as an example. As you can see, the total amount of two-wheelers is projected to increase. And still you have a lot of the petrol vehicles, battery vehicles are projected to increase. So that's really on the transport side. But I wanted to show you one thing in particular on transport. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, this is the one. So just take your time, we'll just look at it. Suppose, we usually, when those of us who live in cities, we see transport. It's a very visible thing. Industry and power plants are somewhere else, but transport is something that we all see the smoke coming out. We feel the pollution, all of that. But I already showed you in one earlier graph, the transport is actually a pretty small share in the total CO2 emissions that are projected. Even if we look at transport specifically, we tend to blame cars, aeroplanes. These are the more conspicuous forms of consumption. But can anybody read from this legend what is that biggest and increasing share of CO2 emissions from transport? Which type of vehicle is it? Trucks. Yeah, that big black chunk is freight trucks. So this is one of the problems that, when soon after the independence, we used to transport a lot of our goods by railways. But over the years, because of a number of policy reasons, number of reasons of convenience, we have been shifting more and more of our goods traffic away from trains, which are actually more efficient in terms of CO2 emissions, and towards road trucks. And this is something that I want you to remember, that when we try to solve, when we try to say, what can we do about climate change? What are the solutions? First, we must try to understand what is the problem really, right? Where is the we want to break up the big problem into smaller problems and try to then find solutions for those smaller problems. So for example, we have reduced the problem, we have not reduced, but we are zoomed in on the problem of transport. And within the problem of transport, we are here zooming in on the problem of freight trucks. So if you look at two-wheelers and three-wheelers, this is the red band. If you look at buses, it's the yellow one. Yeah. If you look at aircraft, it's this light blue one, all very small, relative to this big black thing, which is the trucks. So the question then you must ask is, why are we shipping more and more goods through road rather than rail? What can be done? So some things can be done at a policy level, which is that the government, for example, is investing in these dedicated freight corridors for railways to run uninterrupted. But the big advantage the trucks give is this door-to-door kind of service. So if you're, for example, shifting your house, you want your furniture to be picked up from your own house and then to be delivered to your new house. Or if you want a courier package, you want it to be delivered to your home. Railways don't yet have that last mile connectivity smoothly worked out. It takes longer. Because it takes longer, it's less convenient. It can sometimes be even more expensive. So certainly some regulatory changes are needed. And certainly in some cases, wherever possible, perhaps we can forego some of that convenience factor and try to, opt for the railways option rather than a road option. But certainly this is something that I feel is an example of an intervention which can have a huge impact, but which doesn't require any fancy technology. We already have a railway infrastructure in the country. All we need to do is put in the sort of policies that will encourage this modal shift. Yeah, it doesn't need new money, new technology, or anything like that. Okay. I'm going to look at my list right now to see what other example I want to show you. But is there anybody wants to ask about any particular sector or industry? You can let me know. Yeah, or if you have any question. Like if somebody says, "Can you show us this sector or that sector?" I'll be happy to do that. Okay, I'll show you one last graph about emissions. Yeah. And then I'll move on to the social impacts of remember we're still in the BAU sector. So here we are looking at industry by industry. Which are the big industries that are causing greenhouse gas emissions? And you'll be surprised that there are only a few. And let's look at this. Green is cement. The blue is iron and steel. The yellow is chemicals, right? And then this is all the other industries together. So cement, steel, and chemicals. Why do you think these industries have so much more greenhouse gas emissions than all the other industries? Is there anyone here from a chemistry background by any chance? Anybody wants to guess why cement, steel? So the problem with these industries is that it's not just the use of energy that is causing these emissions, right? It's not just burning fuel. It's also because there are certain chemical processes that happen in the manufacture of cement and steel that release greenhouse gas emissions. So as long as you use the same process to make cement or steel, you're going to have a chemical reaction which generates CO2. Even if you change the fuel completely, even if you don't use any fuel, you will still have those process emissions. So this makes the industry sector a very, very difficult sector to tackle, because it's not something where you can simply substitute fossil fuel energy by renewable energy. You need a completely new way of making cement, a completely new way of making steel, which is different from what we have been doing for the last, since the Industrial Revolution. That is where you actually require research and development to happen. And it's beginning to happen in Europe, but it's not really reached a scale where it is cost efficient for us to adopt low carbon steel or low carbon cement. So that's something that I want you to remember, that just like in the transport example, I showed you that there are some things that are possible without having to use very fancy technology. Well, there are other things that are very difficult and do need new technology. So some parts of the climate change problem are simple and in our own hands, And some parts of the climate change problem are very difficult and not something that can be done by an individual through behavior change. So what is it that we can do? Can we buy less cement and steel? I'm not sure, because given that India's, building new houses, building new offices, building new hospitals, it doesn't seem to be an option for us to use to make fewer buildings. Is there anything we can do to reduce the demand for cement and steel? Anybody wants to guess?
Ma'am, may I say something?
Yes, please.
Ma'am, if we try to limit the like you talked about the buildings, like if the government decides to set a maximum limit, a particular person can can have the houses like number 2, number 3, number like the maximum numbers, because if there are people who have many houses, and that also causes the electricity consumption. Like if we can use one or two, then why to gather so many? And also, like if we get the population bill, not only for the controlling our population, because if we control the population, then it will also reduce the demand for having more buildings. So
Correct. So that is definitely a couple of good options that you have given to reduce the demand for new buildings or new housing. Anyone else have any other third option? I mean, so basically Himanshi spoke about two things. One is fewer people requiring buildings, and then the second was reducing overconsumption, or not having multiple ownership, right? So any third thing you can think about? Anybody? Suppose I say that that's not the first two are not an option. Is there anything else that we can do to reduce the amount of cement or steel that is required?
Recycling the one that already exists, like from the older houses and all that.
That's exactly right. That's the third option, which is you reuse or recycle the materials. So it could, as you said, it could be repurposing from older houses, or it could simply mean a kind of circular economy kind of system where within the same industry we kind of reuse. So iron and steel, for example, it becomes much easier because vehicles are scrapped. There's a lot of scrap metal that is produced from buildings. Like, for example, some bridge or flyover might be broken down, some old railways or ship might be, its lifetime might get over. And so that material, if it is recycled, is definitely a third and very important way, actually, of reducing the demand for new production of cement and steel. So that's something I want you to remember, that Himanshi, when you spoke about electricity use, right? And so far I've been talking both in the energy sector and in the building sector. I've been speaking about energy use. But remember, for the industry sector, it's not just energy, it's not just the fuels, but the processes that are important. So it's important not just to reduce or become smart with the use of energy, we also need to become smart with the use of materials. So recycling of pulp and paper, recycling of scrap metals, recycling of water even, because even water needs to be treated and purified. So any of these materials, not energy, but things, stuff that you can reuse and repurpose and recycle would be a very important way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the, I think that's probably, let's just end there in terms of this segment. I'll speak now a little bit about what are the costs of this business as usual scenario, right? So this pathway that we are on of growing demand for energy, growing demand for materials, growing greenhouse gas emissions, what are the other costs of this pathway, this business as usual pathway that we're on? So the first thing I want to show you is the...
May I ask?
Yes, please.
So a lot has been talked about that agriculture is also like a lot of methane is being emitted from the paddy fields. So like where does agriculture stand? I just want to know in the greenhouse gas emissions.
Correct, correct. So I don't think we have agriculture very well represented in this model. It is there in the policy intervention. So I'll show you an example of that in my next slide. But I can show you. Let me see. Da, 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 da. Yeah, so what I can show you over here is not the paddy fields that you mentioned, but the electricity use right now of the agriculture sector. So that is for pumping water, or it could be for making fertilizers. So it's a pretty small consumer of energy. On the paddy fields, the problem, as you might know, is that when we flood the paddy fields and the part of the crop stays underwater, that part of the crop actually rots. It decomposes a little bit and releases methane. In the absence of air, it releases methane instead of carbon dioxide. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than, so I can show you, for example, the rise of methane. The other contribution of methane emissions from agriculture is that from livestock. So the food that is ruminated by cattle is also generates methane. But as you can see from this graph, I mean, methane is also produced, for example, from the leakage of the oil and gas sector. It is also produced from waste
Dams.
landfills.
Even dams are the new culprits. It has
Dams can also, it's the same thing, that underwater, exactly. So, and then you could also have methane from landfills of garbage, large dumps of waste. So if you look at all of these sources of methane, the agriculture sector is relatively steady. It's not increasing. You can see over here how the rate of it is not increasing the way.
Yes, actually, that was my question, because every time a lot is like, whenever there is climate summit or every international agreement, they talk a lot about the emission of methane by paddy fields, like from countries like India. So I
Right.
just wanted to know, is it that much culprit, or for the greenhouse gases? Because we are always pinpointed.
Right.
India
Well,
is
there are two ways of thinking about it. One is, no, it is not a big culprit. Rice cultivation is a basic food for us. It is not the same as, say, Western diets, which have really got into very excessive consumption of meat. In a way that, even if they reduce their meat consumption a little bit, they will still be eating meat very frequently, and it will reduce emissions. So definitely it's not a culprit. There's no comparison at all between the non-vegetarian diets of the West, or even of China for that matter, and the rice-based diets of India. However, another way of looking at it is that this is something actually that is, again, doable without very fancy technology. If you are able to drain the water, as is already done in some parts of India, that instead of leaving the water standing, you drain it out a few times, then you do reduce the methane emissions. Same way with livestock, that it just means adding a certain, certain material to the food stock of the cattle, and that will reduce the methane emissions. So another way to think of it is just that this is something which is very doable. So if we want to do it, we can take it on. There's no need to be very, sort of very concerned about it. But I would say that certainly the bigger intervention in the agriculture sector for India is to reduce food waste, food loss and waste, because a lot of our agricultural produce, both at the harvest level and between the farm and the market, or farm and the final consumer, gets wasted. If you see food waste, basically there is embodied in that greenhouse gas emissions that have gone into making that food, either in terms of pumping water or using fertilizer. So that's something where, again, I think you can think of it as efficiency, that let's not waste food at any stage, and that will also help. Yeah. So these are the different aspects of, I think, emissions from agriculture. Are there any other questions? You can also write them in the chat box. I can always come back to the questions later, and I won't be able to, I don't know if I'll be able to see the questions, but participants are welcome to type their questions in the chat box if they don't want to ask them orally. Okay, so I was going to talk to you about, so just like I showed methane emissions, we have different kinds of emissions. So everybody now knows what is PM 2.5, right? Particulate matter. So because we are burning these fossil fuels, we're also releasing other emissions, PM 2.5, PM 10 is increasing a lot. And so the impact of this on our health, oh, sorry, this one I won't be able to show you, I think. Yeah, this is the business as usual. I won't be able to show you this, but I will show you the comparison when I go to the alternative scenario. So let me just go back to the pollutants that I was showing, that even things like NOx, for example, carbon monoxide, all of these will be growing with the same kind of fuel use. One more thing I wanted to show was, yeah. Sorry. Okay. Remember I told you about how we import a lot of oil? Well, this is our oil import bill. You know, the red is basically crude oil. So this is in lakh crore rupees per year. So if we don't switch away from oil use, this is the foreign exchange that keeps going out of our country. So this is another way to think of the costs of not switching to cleaner options. I think that's about it in terms of, let's see if I have one more. Okay. Okay, I'll show you one more, which is because the point I'm trying to make here is that it's any kind of use of fossil fuels increases greenhouse gas emissions, which cause climate change, but it also increases local air pollution, which affects our health. It increases our oil import expenditure, which has to be paid in foreign exchange. And here I'm also trying to show that it also increases water consumption by the power plants. Can anybody guess why power plants are using water? I've never been to a power plant, so I'm not looking for a technical answer. Thermal power plant, yeah.
Actually, basically, if students want.
Sorry?
I want to let them speak first. Okay, some of the students say so. Okay,
Yeah.
Himanshu is saying, "Ma'am, in case of chemical process," I mean, she's asking some question.
Okay, I'll look at that.
Yeah. Okay, I thought she's speaking on the same thing. So I think now nobody's answering. I can answer it now. What do you ask?
To let it cool down, somebody has said.
Basically,
Exactly.
yes. And in thermal power plants, basically the energy is being, produced by producing steam. So what is being boiled, and then super heat. If the steam is directed towards turbines, that actually is helps in producing. And finally, the water, there is a lot of not only in thermal power plants but in nuclear power plants also.
Yes.
Yes. Or in all these power plants, basically water is used, energy is used to heat up the water, and that superheated steam which is produced by water, it is having a lot of force, and with a lot of speed it falls on the turbine, and turbines are connected to the MHDs or generators, right, in simple sense.
Correct.
So as soon, faster the movement of the turbines, more will be the energy production. So that's why there's a lot of water consumption is there in the thermal power plants, and
Correct.
also
And if
steel plants. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could ask you to reflect a little bit further on if you were to replace these thermal power plants by more of solar, do you think there would be a kind of water saving, or how would
Yeah.
it affect? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. You want me how water, move shifting to solar panels, will help us save water. So I know. I also wanted to ask you in the end about this question, because a lot of question is being asked these days. We are focusing a lot of, or investing a lot of in solar panels these days, solar
Right.
cells, like photovoltaic cells. So if you're aware of it, it is just a beginning that we are in. After that International Solar Alliance, we are investing a lot, and we have also increased our we're trying to reach the 100 gigawatt
Yeah.
independence in that solar plant. But some few days, like last year, I was just reading an article that we are investing so much in the solar panels, but you must be knowing that, arsenic, which is a heavy metal, silicon is
Okay.
doped with arsenic. Basically, that heavy metal is used in producing those semiconductors, photovoltaic cells. So the problem here is, right now, because average life cycle of a solar cell is 20, say 25 to 30 year, max to max 25. So we haven't reached the
Yeah.
maximum capacity. So now the like problem that we are going to face in the next 20-25 years is a large amount of hazardous waste is going to be created by this. Why hazardous waste? Because it is a heavy metal, arsenic, which causes health problems to us, which is going to affect the soil, pollute the soil and water. And as we know, the heavy metals have biomagnification property. So finally, it is going to enter the crops, and finally it is going to affect us. So a lot of there is talk about this, whether we should invest so much heavily only in solar panels or the photovoltaic cells. The other options that we have is, we have other processes also, methods also, to trap the solar power, to produce electricity. Like, you must have heard about solar power trucks or parabolic discs or power towers. There, what they do, they use some salt or or some oil kind of a thing to attain the heat of the, absorb the heat, more and more heat of the sun, so that then that can be used to produce electricity. But in that matter, we again will have to use that heat. That heat is, in case of power towers or a parabolic disc that I'm talking about, basically a oil or a salt is used to heat up, using the sunlight. Then what is being done, that heat is used to boil the water again, then the use of water comes. So we have to dilemma is there. In one process we will have to use water, in other process which might, like, which is not very much water intensive, but which might create a problem in the future. So that's something which is there.
That's absolutely right. So, you use the word dilemma. Another word that we would use is trade-off. That there's always one, sort of
Yeah,
pro
yes.
in a positive thing in a technology or a policy option, but there's always something else. And that's really something that you're absolutely right. As we make such strong, far-reaching policy on climate change, we really need to take into account what are these local impacts. And it may be that, for example, something is good for Maharashtra but is bad for West Bengal. So or something that is that men are able to take advantage of and women are not able to take advantage of. So what are the implications for specific regions, for specific social groups? Is something that needs to be discussed very openly, and these pros and cons have to be weighed. Thanks a lot for sharing about the alternative technologies. Another alternative technology that I'll touch on next is that of hydrogen, which is coming up as an alternative fuel. But there's a catch that also requires renewable energy. So I'll come to that. But certainly the issue of hazardous waste is something that is beginning to concern people more and more. Right now, we are on a pretty low scale, but as we use more and more of RE, like right now, renewable energy is about 20% of our electricity. In the future, it has to become 80%. So just imagine how much of solar panels and all will be made. Again, there is a need to do a circular economy approach, to reuse, not just because of the hazardous waste issue that you pointed out, but also because the very rare minerals that go into this in small quantities, into solar panels, into batteries, is something that we need to again import from other countries. So for both of these reasons, the raw materials and the waste handling, we need to think of a circular economy approach for this. I think Himanshi had raised her hand or had a question. Do you want to jump in?
Yes, ma'am, I want to say something. Like in my 12th class, I have heard this about the superconductors and the research that is going on to make the superconductors at the room temperature. So, ma'am, if we get succeed in this, so then we can have the revolution in the electricity field. So, what is the future of it? Like making the superconductors at the room temperature, like the how can the research be
Yeah,
direct?
I don't know. I'm not at all an expert on this topic, but definitely, I think the word that you use, revolution, I think that definitely there are many different kinds of revolutionary processes, technologies that are underway. Hydrogen is definitely one. As I said, I'll speak about it a little bit. Another is carbon capture and storage, which is something that also a lot of people are trying to make it cheaper. I would argue that battery technologies themselves are really at a stage right now where we're kind of in the middle of the revolution, where there are alternative chemistries that are being explored, and there are innovations that are being explored to bring down the cost. Because you could have something that is working in the lab, but in order for it to be used by every company or every home, it needs to become much cheaper. So definitely 30 years is a long time. There are many revolutions that are around the corner. I think all of you should be very optimistic. I know climate change and all of these reports can be very depressing to read, but definitely I'm very optimistic that there are many different kinds of energy revolutions that you will see within the next 10, 20, 30 years. So yeah, watch out for those. I will now just go back to this. Neha, do you normally take a 5-minute break or a 2-minute break during such a long session? Yeah,
it's fine. It's fine. Please
okay.
Go ahead.
And should I show this for 10 minutes and then I'll stop, and then we can just go back into discussion mode for as long as the participants are interested?
Sure,
yeah?
as you like. Yeah.
Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, so far we were only looking at business as usual. Now we're going to go to a policy scenario called long-term decarbonization. And you can all make your own scenarios. This is a scenario that my colleagues and I have made, but you can change any of these options over here. You can decide how much electricity you want. Like, for example, you can decide that I'm going to ban all new power plants. Like, you just decide, you're the prime minister of the country or the president of the country or whatever, and you decide that you will take certain decisions. So it's like, say, playing Monopoly or something like that. Or you decide that you're going to have, for example, a lot of electricity use in certain industries. So it's a little takes a little time to get used to, but at the in each one of these options, if you click on learn about this policy, there's actually some useful literature that kind of guides you in what is it that's realistic, what is it, what policy can you change, what lever can you set. And it's a very simple kind of toggle like this. You can just say, do you want it to be about 50%, do you want it to be a maximum 100%, and you'll see the impact of it on the screen. So again, as I said, I sort of feel free to play around with this. But right now, what I'll show you is one combination, which is long-term decarbonization. And so what we mean by long-term decarbonization is a combination of policies across different sectors. And this is where the systems dynamics nature of the model really becomes powerful. That is, you're not looking only at one sector at a time, but at how effects in one sector have implications for another sector, how a price change in one sector could affect another sector. And so let's go back to what we started with, right? The CO2 emissions overall, the greenhouse gas emissions overall. This black line was the business as usual that we had been looking at all this while, going up, up, up. And in this long-term decarbonization, we have a green line, which is down. We, in fact, have even more optimistic scenarios where you can make this green line go all the way down almost to zero by 2050. Not maybe for greenhouse gas emissions, but for CO2. Yeah, right. See how the CO2 line is going down? So what does this mean? This means a number of different things are happening. We are using cleaner fuels. So, for example, let me show you what is happening in the electricity sector. This is electricity generation. See how much yellow there is. All of this is coming from solar, right? Coal, which is this gray, is going down to zero by 2040. So this is the landscape of the electricity sector under the low carbon scenario, under the climate friendly kind of scenario. which if we want it to happen, we need to have lots of policies in place. It will not happen by itself. What will happen by itself? That business as usual scenario that I showed you. That's what will happen in the normal course of events, given the normal cost implications in the economy, the normal decisions in the economy. If you want this kind of penetration of renewable energy, then a lot of policies need to happen. The government needs to mandate for various players in the economy, industries, cities, that a large fraction of their electricity has to come from renewable energy. Right now, renewable energy, that is solar energy, is actually as cheap almost as coal. So it's not something that you're forcing people to adopt a more expensive technology. It's actually right now competitive with fossil fuels. So there is no reason why we shouldn't choose a cleaner form of electricity on purely economic grounds. So that's electricity. Let's look at transport. So we look at all of those charts that we looked at in the business as usual and see how they are different. Yeah, so let me just stay here for a while. Business as usual, remember, this was how it was. Yellow, solar PV was increasing, but in the long-term decarbonization, it's increased a whole lot, from 20% to 80% or more. Okay, let's look at transport sector now. Yeah. Right. So this is now what is happening in the transport sector in the long-term decarbonization scenario. We're not letting the petrol and diesel vehicles grow. We are letting only the electric vehicles grow. Same for, say, two-wheelers. Two-wheelers, we're making sure that after 2030, basically more and more of the new vehicles, any new vehicle that is sold is going to be an electric vehicle, electric two-wheeler, not a diesel or gas. So as you go further and further into time, the older vehicles get phased out and the newer vehicles that are sold in the market are all electric. At the same time, what is happening is this: as your electric vehicles are increasing, your electricity is also becoming cleaner. Remember, we saw that electricity graph, how there's more yellow. So as your electricity becomes cleaner, when you plug in your electric vehicle into the power socket in your building, you're using cleaner and cleaner electricity from the grid as we move from 2030 to 2040 to 2050. So the combination of these factors means that greenhouse gas emissions come down from both the power sector and the transport sector. So that's really the kind of systems sort of feedback that needs to happen. If only one happens and the other doesn't happen, then greenhouse gas emissions won't come down. So if, for example, you're moving to electric vehicles, but the electricity is still coming from coal, then that will not be good for the climate or for the environment. Right? So both of these need to happen. You need policies across all of these sectors. Let's just look at this one. Remember how in the BAU, buildings electricity demand was increasing? In the long-term decarbonization scenario, we're not letting it increase. We're sort of controlling it. Yeah. And the way to control it is by all of those things that we spoke about. That is energy efficiency mandates in the building sector, appliances and lighting becoming more efficient as well. Many other kinds of things need to happen in this particular sector. Okay, now this, I'll just show you one thing. Just watch out for this. Anybody who's paying attention, just watch out, right? I'm going to ask you to look at this graph, right? Blue is buildings, gray is industry, red is transport, green is agriculture, and purple is district heat and hydrogen. Now I'll show you the same graph for business as usual. Did anything go missing?
Yes.
Which one is that?
Students, please.
I think
District heat and hydrogen.
That's right, yeah. So that's really the new technology that we are depending on a lot in this particular scenario. And that's what I'm going to kind of talk about, which is that we need, remember, I think somebody asked a question, I think it was Himanshi, saying that if process emissions are so part and parcel of how we make things, then is there no option? And I think one of the revolutionary things that people are putting a lot of attention on, I think the Prime Minister even mentioned it in his speech on Independence Day, is this use of hydrogen instead of coal or natural gas in the industry sector. And hydrogen is a fuel just like, say, gas, but it's a difficult fuel to use. We don't use it much right now. And hydrogen is currently produced from natural gas, but more and more in the future, it needs to be produced from renewable energy again. So I'm going to sort of stop talking about hydrogen and show you, I think, only one last graph on the CO2, right? Now, this is really just the takeaway from this whole lecture, which is if you want to go from that black line to a green line, that is from a polluting scenario to a clean scenario, it doesn't come down to any one thing. You need, see how many policies there are over here. There's something like 20, 30 over here, and the list continues. So something like 50 different policies need to happen in every sector. So the red ones are relating to transport, the yellow ones are relating to energy, the blue ones are relating to industry, and the green ones are relating to agriculture and forestry. So every sector, something needs to happen, and it's not coming down to just, blaming the transport sector or blaming aeroplanes or, hotels or whatever. Every sector of the economy will have to be transformed. And the other big takeaway for me is that it doesn't just come down to individual actions. So when people said, what is it that I can do as an individual, right? And then someone else asked, developing countries are trying to emulate the overconsumption standards of the rich countries. That's the link that you need to make, that as an individual, perhaps many of these policy changes are really way above our level. But as an individual, collectively, we can control the amount of consumption and demand that we have. We can become much more thoughtful in how much we consume, how much of new products we buy, how much we travel, how much electricity we use. So any one person, can't change policy perhaps, but collectively, the consumption side of things, the demand side of things is completely in our hands, right? And so that's really the way I would kind of, that's the point that I would want you to take away from this talk. I just want to make one or two points of trade-offs, as Neha put it, that there are certain kinds of pitfalls that we need to watch out for. And I'll give you one example over here, which is that of this material efficiency, longevity, and reuse, which is, remember, I was talking about how for cement and steel, we need to, in fact, reduce our consumption of these materials. Now, if we look at the impact on the economy of doing all of these things, yeah. So let's just go there. Hang on, where is it? Yeah. Yeah. So when we do all of these things from an environmental perspective, so you're trying to reduce CO2 emissions, you're trying to have more renewable energy, this is something which is also good for the economy. So this red line is the part of GDP that is coming down because we are using less fossil fuels, right? But the yellow line is, the black line is that the total GDP of the country is actually improving because of these actions. So the important point over here is that the debate is often framed as environment versus development, but actually it is not at all that. You can have better environment and you can have higher GDP. Same thing will happen if you look at jobs. So this model shows you how there will be some amount of jobs increased in the electricity sector, in the manufacturing and construction sector, because you're switching to new fuels and you're building more infrastructure in the economy. But all of this will have a multiplier effect. It will stimulate more consumption in the economy, which will translate into greater demand for things like food, for hotels or transportation or whatever, and it will have a positive effect on the economy. So the point is not that that as if with climate action, we are going to go back to the dark ages, or that we are going to go back to some kind of very rural, sort of very simple lifestyle. The point is we should not over-consume, you should not have excessive consumption, and what you do consume should be manufactured without using fossil fuels, using cleaner substitute fuels. But we are not talking about compromising on development. So I think I'm going to maybe probably just stop. I think one sort of example is that, there is a health effect as well. These are the avoided premature deaths. So you can see that, by 2050, you would, have so many lakhs of lives saved due to the air pollution improvement. We had spoken about the oil import bill, as you would recall, that goes down. So this was the energy imports, energy import expenditure, that comes down a little bit. You have the water use, water consumption by power plants. So the gray is the coal. So because coal is coming down, all of the water consumption from power plants is falling quite a lot. So you could have environmental effects, you could have social benefits, and you could have economic benefits all going hand in hand. But what it requires, just to again end with that same diagram, is many, many different things need to happen between now and the next 10 years and beyond. Some things for which we have the technologies already in hand and we just need the right policies, and others for which we need to encourage research and development to happen. So let me just stop talking there right now. I'll also stop sharing my screen, and maybe we can just take a few more questions before we wrap up. Yeah. So thank you everybody for following along. And yeah. I think Himanshi has a question again. Go ahead, Himanshi.
Yes, ma'am. In the discussion, we get to know that the policy changes is very important. Like in the country, how can we create a positive pressure on the market? Because despite all the rules and regulation, we can see how they have polluted the rivers, and every day we see it and just move ahead. So, ma'am, how can that positive pressure can be built from the side of the government, or can the mass mobilization can do that? Like if the people mobilize towards this and made it so important that the government will have to do put up positive kind of pressure on the industries, private industries particularly.
Right. So I would give two answers to that. One is that increasingly these days, when the government makes any kind of new policy document, it is always shared on their website for public consultation. And this is open public consultation that is invited as part of any new policy making process. So I would encourage all of you, whether it is as individuals or whether it is part of any organizations that you're working with, to provide feedback, because that is definitely something that is considered by government officials, and which is something that is that can feed into the policy making process. So we should not be passive. We should, when the government is inviting public consultation, we should very much participate in it. The second is the importance of research, because unless we generate evidence, about the impact of a particular project, then it becomes, otherwise it's just an empty debate that somebody feels that there is a negative impact on environment or on people. I think there's a very important need to document and to conduct studies on what are the impacts of certain projects. So those of you who have the chance to work with organizations that conduct these kinds of impact assessments, please do document it, put your reports in the public domain. Don't just let it be a kind of verbal thing. And third, I would say that industries also right now are under a lot of pressure, not from the government, but from their own investors, to become more sustainable. So every company has its own sustainability officer, and they take on often voluntary targets that the government even has not asked them to. but voluntarily they take on carbon targets, carbon prices, other kinds of sort of contributions. And more and more this pressure is coming from the West. I mean, as an example, Europe has now passed a law that after 2035, they will not allow any sales of non-electric vehicles. So any car sold in Europe after 2035, after 14 years, can't run on diesel or petrol. Now, the Indian automobile industry really looks at Europe as a major export market. So any company, any Indian company that wants to continue to export cars to Europe after 14 years needs to start producing electric vehicles as well, not just petrol and diesel vehicles. So a lot of the pressure happens not because of pressure that the Indian government or that Indian people or population will put on industry, but because of market forces, because of more and more financial investors requiring such actions, and because of new markets changing in Europe or the United States or even Southeast Asia. So, so I would say that that there are many different things that are happening. And as long as these are aligned, that is, as long as we are not making policy that kind of counters the positive effect of the market forces, I think we should be, that is the direction in which to go.
Thank you, ma'am, for the answer.
You're welcome.
Anyone else wants to ask any question? Please go ahead. Yeah, please. Yes, Dr. Ulka.
No, I was just going to ask, I'd be very interested. So is the program like, is this the last lecture in the program, or are you continuing?
No.
Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. We are continuing till 17th September.
Okay.
It's a month-long course, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, here is 4th lecture.
Right.
Yes. So we have divided this course into 3 broad, themes, basically. One was the climate crisis, then, climate and community, next theme, second theme, and the third theme is community and conservation. So we have tried to, say everything, how climate is going to affect the community, or how community can play a role in the conservation, environmental conservation in the long run. So, okay, so I think Radhika wants to ask something. Please unmute yourself, Radhika. Radhika, please unmute yourself and ask your question. You can type also if you can. Okay, yeah, please.
Okay. So, ma'am, we were discussing the impact and the different industries as you had shown us. So, ma'am, what about the animal rearing and animal husbandry? Because recently the High Court released this, something about cows. So, a lot of researchers are showing that the impact that cows have, and they release a lot of, the gases, and so like it's a very funny title, but it said, we think very less of the cow's fart. So the gas they release. So what is the impact of that? Is it really that much, and are we not considering it enough?
Yeah, this was the discussion that we had earlier with Neha as well, earlier in the lecture. So first of all, it's not the fart, but the burp. Yeah, it's true. So, I mean, it's the methane is released when the food is being kind of ruminated and belched. And as I said, there's a very simple there are simple solutions, which is to simply, there are additives that can be entered into the feed of the cattle in order to reduce the emissions from enteric fermentation. So, so I would say it's not a very big problem. It's also not a very, fancy technical solution that's required. If we wanted to reduce methane emissions from the livestock sector, we can do so. But I mean, as I tried to show you from the charts, it's the energy sector, industry sector, and building sector, which has a much higher carbon footprint than the agriculture sector. Much higher and growing carbon footprint than the agriculture sector.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Himanshu wants to ask something. Please go ahead, Himanshu.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, recently we have witnessed this verbal conflict between PETA and the Amul. So, ma'am, in the market, from the market point of view, like PETA was arguing that there is a time we should move on the vegan milk products, not the dairy one, because they are not good for, because they we in the dairy products there is exploitation of animals happens as the people do not treat well the animals, but the response Amul gave is that from the market point of view, and there are lots of farmers whose or like the finances or the like their livelihood depends on that, the cooperative societies. So we cannot just shift to the vegan just because you are saying that the exploitation happens, because there are people's livelihood is attached with that. So ma'am, what is your opinion on that with perspective of the market?
I don't think my opinion matters. I was just recently talking to some colleagues of mine, and one of them, we were giving a farewell to one of our colleagues who was leaving, and she is a vegan. So another colleague said, "Oh, because of her, I've become 80% vegan." She's like, "What is this 80% vegan?" So I find it very hard to give up paneer and a little bit of butter chicken. So I think this is all sort of not something that, either the policy or one individual's opinion matters in this. How many of you are vegans? Anyone here is a vegan? Nobody? Oh, one person, two
one.
people.
I'm transitioning because I'm lactose intolerant.
Okay, all right.
Yes, ma'am.
So two people. So why don't you answer Himanshi's question? I don't have an opinion at all. I have no expertise on the topic. Do you want to, Radhika or Priyasha, do you want to answer Himanshi's question?
This is something that I am also conflicted upon when it comes to the argument that people give that a lot of people's livelihood depends on cattle farming and everything. Ma'am, like you showed that if we are going to have a carbon-less approach in the future, the economy is going to go down. That is a consequence that we will have. And
Actually, I showed it will go up. With certain things, it will go down, but the overall effect is positive. If we have low carbon interventions, it's actually good for the economy. The only negative part is if you have material efficiency improvements, that depresses the economy. But please go ahead. Definitely, there will be job gains and job losses in different sectors. So your point is valid. Yeah.
it's really such a broad topic wherein, like you said, nobody's opinion really matters, because at the end of the day, the government is going to do what is going to benefit them. And
No, I didn't mean it that way. What I meant is with things like behavioral change. So those of you who are interested in getting into this topic, there is this whole area of work called behavioral economics or nudge economics, where you try to, one option is to pass laws, so you have regulatory instruments. Another option is to have market-based instruments, so you have taxes or subsidies. So you tax the behavior that you're trying to discourage and subsidize the behavior that you're trying to encourage. And a third is to have a very discrete nudge. So without people realizing that they're being made to do something, you kind of gently sort of nudge them in a particular direction. So advertising could be one example of a nudge. Providing information or labeling on a particular product. When we see how many calories does this product have, what are the ingredients, how much sugar does it have, that kind of information is also a way of influencing people's behavior. So with some of these behavioral change aspects, I think we need to look at these informational and nudge kind of instruments rather than having a blanket ban or the sort of approach that everybody needs to follow. As long as many people are kind of going in a certain direction, it collectively helps. There are other also very interesting novel ways of changing demand, and I'll give you the example of LED lighting. So LED lights, when they first came into the market, were energy efficient, but also very expensive. And people each individual wouldn't necessarily go out and buy or change the lights in their house. Even if they were, they would save electricity costs over time. They said, no, the first cost is expensive, so why should I purchase a more expensive light bulb? So what if it reduces my electricity bill? So what the government did was they acted as a demand aggregator. They purchased a large amount of electricity of LED lights. In placing that bulk purchase, they were able to command a lower price for that. And then they rolled out these electricity, sort of these light bulbs as a part of people's electricity bills, and people just switch to them. So there is often a role for intermediaries. So here there was no law, there was no tax or subsidy. It was simply the power of aggregating demand and driving down the price that was able to effect a kind of demand side change. And the interesting thing again over here is that it's not something that's expensive. It's something that kind of pays for itself. Still, people may not do it. So you can apply the same lesson to other kinds of behavioral change that you're wanting to see in society. Yeah, I think Priyasha is also saying that apart from those whose livelihoods depend on livestock, a lot of low-income families can only afford meat. And yeah, so it's actually a sort of individual decision. I would again encourage you to keep in mind the charts that I've been showing you, which show, agriculture was always that very small green band, and the big gray one, blue one, red one were all energy, transport, buildings, industry, coal, oil, right? So keep in perspective that what is the driving force. So the reasons for interventions in agriculture might be because of no longer kind of food security in terms of quantity of food, but simply in terms of how nutritious our food is. Are we consuming too much of sugar, for example? Are we consuming too much of produce, agricultural crops that are very water intensive, so that we are growing water intensive crops in areas where water shortage is there, right? So how do we switch from rice and wheat to hardy millets? These are the kinds of bigger issues in agriculture. And dietary preferences are really sort of the kind of the demand side, which sort of can encourage these kinds of switches. So yeah, let me, I think, stop there, and Neha, back to you, your hands, if you'd like to wrap up the session.
Yes, thank you so much. It was such an engaging and engrossing session. So any other questions, anyone? I think like you have already answered all of their queries, and like it was really such an engaging discussion today. So Ulka, on behalf of faculty and students of Indraprastha College for Women, I would like to extend my gratitude to all of you present here in this special lecture session in the online certificate course on climate community and conservation. Thank you so much, Dr. Ulka. It was such an engaging and engrossing talk, and we have learned a lot. I really liked, first of all, I would like to congratulate you, and your colleagues for developing this model that you've discussed about system dynamics model. It was really innovative. And, the business as usual scenario and the long-term decarbonization scenario that you have told a lot, to us, that how various fields, like the projections that you have shown till 2050, they were really interesting. And it was really great to, know that how you emphasized rightly on like that, how by opting recycling and repurposing in basically the 5 R's that are in in various industries, how can we can produce we can stop producing a lot of huge amount of waste. Actually, that is also one of the main culprit for producing so many greenhouse gases, and also in large run the emission of the greenhouse gases from various industries. I really liked how you told how can we reduce the greenhouse gases emission and the waste in the cement and iron and steel industries specifically, in by building, how can we control it. It was really interesting to know. And points to trade-offs, not to mention, like, I would like to specifically mention here the points to trade-off that you talked about. Like, it was really such a great learning experience. And in the end, the biggest takeoff, as like the from the whole of your talk, that the crux that we have learned is that we environmentalists always talk about that, a lot of people differ with us that no, environment and GDP cannot go hand in hand. But yes, you said environmental benefits, social benefits, and economic benefits can go hand in hand. And the biggest line, I will take it with me today from your lecture, that you just said, you can have better environment and higher GDP together. Thank you so much. It was really interesting, and I myself have learned a lot from today's session. Now, I would also like to thank Coordinator, Center for Earth Studies, Dr. Anandita Roy Saha, for helping us not only in conceptualizing the course, but for her constant support in organizing it. I would also like to thank the faculty members present here today with us, and last but not the least, the participants. Uh, Thank you so much once again, Ulka. It was really engaging and, engrossing.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for
And we
your
are
kind
really
words.
proud that you are our alumna.
Right.
Thank
And
you,
I've
Mama. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I've put in the
Thank you.
chat box the link to the model that I showed. It's there on the web. Also, my email address and my Twitter handle. Would love to continue engaging with the participants and supporting you with any future endeavors. So all the best to everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Now, the participants, I would like to tell you all, please keep a tab on the course web portal, because we have mentioned all the dates and the details of all the upcoming lectures. And as you know that, we will keep on updating you. So the next lecture in this session, in this course is scheduled for tomorrow. So I'll be sending you the Meet link and all the details of that. So see you everyone tomorrow. Thank you so much. You may leave now.